Good afternoon, everyone. I feel like we've hit the post-lunch crowd, so appreciate everyone who's here and who's still committed to the entirety of our panels today and the entirety of the conference. Rachel Rizzo here. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. It's a think tank based in Washington, D.C. I want to start by saying thank you to the Armenian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Observer Research Foundation, and the other partners for hosting this conference. One common theme I have found emerging from the panels over the last couple of days is everyone letting everyone else know how many times they have been to Armenia. So I find it incumbent upon myself to tell everyone that this is my first time to Yerevan, my first time to Armenia, hopefully not my last. This is a beautiful city, a beautiful country, and I feel very lucky and privileged to be here. I also feel very lucky to be able to moderate this panel on what I believe is one of the most important topics in geopolitics today, which is this question of enlargement of the European Union. And as you saw from the title of this panel, should EU enlargement be made easier? That sort of gets to the heart of the question, but we have a fantastic panel with us today where we can not only tackle that, but really get to the heart of what the EU is, what it means for countries that want to join the European Union, and also the challenges that come along with it. You know, past waves of EU enlargement have brought both opportunities and challenges. They've created new partnerships, but also on the flip side, have at times deepened tensions between Brussels and new member states. So today, this question about further EU enlargement really is at the forefront of conversations about the EU. Obviously, Ukraine is a big part of this. You know, coming from Washington, D.C., focusing on security, you often hear conversations about Ukraine's NATO accession. And I think the EU part of this often gets ignored, or at least gets put on the back burner a bit. But in my mind, that is actually a more important question for Ukraine. And there's also multiple EU candidate countries in the so-called waiting room. So with that, I want to turn to, I feel lucky that I don't really have to answer any of these questions today. I get to ask the panelists. I have the easy job. You all have the difficult job. But of course, you're all best suited to answer these questions. So I wanted to start to my immediate right because, you know, we are in Armenia, we're in Yerevan. Mr. Sarges Khandanyan, who is chair of the Standing Committee on Foreign Relations at the Armenian National Assembly. It's fantastic to be with you here today. Let's start by talking a little bit about the Armenian experience specifically. The Armenian parliament officially adopted a law to launch your EU accession. This was signed by the Prime Minister just last month, so it's fresh off the press. Can you talk a little bit about what this means for Armenia specifically? What are your aspirations in terms of both EU membership, but also deeper partnerships with the EU until that day comes? But also maybe what that means for other candidates, maybe specifically in the South Caucasus, but also more broader than that, seeking deeper integration while also navigating some really real and complex geopolitical challenges, especially that come along with being in this region. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And I want to first welcome everyone in Yerevan. It is a great honor and pleasure to have you all. And I'm very happy that we have many parliamentarians among us these 2 days, and I also hope that this won't be your first and last visit, but you will visit frequently. This is a panel where actually I have more questions than answers, and we have a lot of questions in Armenia about the EU membership and the prospects of enlargement. But I would like to go a few decades back and start with the platform that the European Union envisioned its relations with with the countries on its east, which was Eastern Partnership. And back then, at its inception, it was about everything but membership. But then, eventually, we realized that the membership is also a prospective. And now we see countries among Eastern Partner countries that have a candidate status, namely Ukraine, Moldova, and also the last one is Georgia. So it raised questions also in Armenian society and political and public sphere. Why can't we also be members or candidate members, candidates for the European Union membership? And we often discuss this with our European colleagues, and we often hear that Armenia must show strong signals towards its desire to become more closer to the European Union and eventually to become a member of the European Union. And the law that you have mentioned is one of those signals, maybe a bit symbolic one, but it's also a very important commitment taken by the government of Armenia, showing this signal and commitment to, at one point, also consider a membership to the European Union. And its most important factor in this is that it's not an initiative by the government of Armenia or by one political party in Armenia. It is an initiative by the public. So it was the public initiative that came to the parliament. So Armenian public has that intention or considers that possibility or perspective to become a member of the European Union. But before we take that path, before we submit that application, I think the process is also very important. And I would break this into three dimensions. First of all, political dialogue that we are having with the European Union. And it goes beyond with the CEPA agreement, Comprehensive and Enhanced Partnership Agreement that we have with the European Union. We have I believe that at the moment, the relations between Armenia and the European Union has never been closer. So we have a very strong political dialogue. The second one is people-to-people contacts and getting to know the Europe better for our citizens. And for that, I'm happy to share that we started the visa liberalization dialogue with the European Union. And we are confident that we are going to be the champion among all the countries who ever had that negotiations to be the fastest one. So we are going to do the reforms that is required for that to help our people to know the European Union better and closer. And I would also add to this the deployment of the European Civilian Mission, which is also a very important, beyond its security and security component. It's also very important for the citizens of Armenia to see how the European Union functions and to have a small a pillar of the European Union on the ground. And the third dimension is the trade and economic cooperation. Here that we need from both sides do more to be closer, to do a lot of homework, to become more compatible for the European markets. But also we are looking forward more support from the European Union, more openness for the trade. Of course, the supply routes are very important in this context, and I think I believe that is one of the reasons as well that the Armenian government is pushing its Crossroads of Peace initiative so enthusiastically, because it will also help us greatly to be much closer to the European Union.
Thank you. Sort of building on that, I want to go next to Julius Pranavicius, who's the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs from Lithuania. Welcome, and thank you for being here. Lithuania was part of, I believe, the 5th round of EU accession. You joined in 2004, so there have been 7 rounds of EU accession or EU enlargement since the original 6 were created as part of the EEC in 1957. So you joined in 2004, which means just last year you celebrated 20 years as a member of the EU, with all of the benefits and also challenges that come along with that. So I wanted to ask you specifically, given your experience as part of this, how do you, what are some maybe lessons learned from your position? And Dr. Fawn, I'll ask you that question as well in terms of just broader post-Soviet states, but specifically in terms of Lithuania, how do you view the balance of maintaining these strict accession criteria, but also accelerating EU enlargement to a point where it actually can respond to geopolitical threats? So it's sort of a two-pronged question, but you can feel free to tackle that however you like.
Good. Thank you so much for your questions, and it's really great to be in Yerevan and great to be in your event. I do remember very well those similar discussions we had back in Lithuania more than 20 years ago when we were just planning our path towards European Union, when we were planning our accession talks. And at that time, as you said, it was a 5th enlargement. We had experience of previous enlargements. There was such an understanding that there is a classical method of EU enlargement. And it is true that ever since the first new member states were adopted or acceded to European Union, or the organizations that preceded European Union, there were always those rules there that you don't. There is no negotiation between equals. It's about negotiations about how you will accede to this organization. And the way how you accede is like you don't discuss that organization will change and then you will do something jointly. No, it's about how you will implement all the EU laws, all the EU regulations into your own national law system and how you will apply them. The things like conditionality, very strict conditionality, that if you want to move a step further, you need to implement certain conditions. They always existed there. And they existed for a reason. I think it's the whole idea of European Union being a transformative power, where European Union can, and it's actually one of the greatest things of European Union is that it can really reorganize the country. It can transform it into something very different, where you are starting your journey to accede to European Union, then you do all the reforms, you adhere you approximate all the laws with the EU laws, and at the end of the day, you find yourself already a different country. So we knew it from the theory, and we knew that these are the rules. We had very tough talks, and we had very tough decisions to make on some reforms. In our case, one of them was like decommissioning nuclear power plant, and there were a lot of debates internally, should we do this or not, that we had to solve Kaliningrad transit issues. So many things that at that time we felt like, okay, it's sometimes probably it's even unfair why we have to do all those things and why EU keeps asking us all those things. But we knew from the theory that that's how EU enlargement is working, and that's what we need to do to accede to it. And now, fast forward those 20 years after we acceded to European Union, I think it was worth doing that, and it was and those conditions, they are there for the reason. So very good that we were taking them seriously, that we implemented all the reforms, that we transposed all the EU laws into our legislative system, and it is working well. In our case, we really managed to transform country. I just to give you some figures, the days when we were just acceding to European Union, our GDP per capita was less than 40% of EU average. Today, we are above 90%. If you look at our wages, at our pensions, retirement allowances, and other things, you could see that they went up in time, sometimes in 5 times. For example, for the retirement schemes, That's really the miracle that it was only possible because we could participate in EU joint market where we could benefit from actively competing with other European countries. Also using well all the structural assistance that came with the accession to European Union. But in our case, the general feeling is that EU was always supported in Lithuania. We are one of the most euro-enthusiastic countries. So those conditions, they have to be there. Now about Ukraine, I also think that be it Ukraine, be it Western Balkans or any other countries, we still have to have those strict conditions that in order to become member of European Union, you have to do all the reforms, you have to adjust to European laws. But what could be done internally, the way how we make decisions in the European Union, in some cases it is becoming really too cumbersome. One for anything, for all the chapters to open, all the new things that you have to do there, you always need unanimity. So then it's a kind of hostage of anyone who would say, I have my own political agenda, I have for particular reasons, I will be blocking those decisions. So I think we could really think about the ways how we can enhance internal procedures in European Union to make that process smoother. Thank you.
So just to build on this really fast, I mean, should there be a sort of, or could there be, I guess, a sort of tiered system within the EU? You know, people talk about like a multi-speed Europe. Mm-hmm. And is that something that is realistic? What would that look like?
It's a great discussion, but we can discuss it for hours, not just about the accession, but the future of European Union. Should it be two speeds or multiple speeds? In some cases, you already have those speeds. We have a Schengen zone, and not all the members are there in Schengen. We have Eurozone, so not all the countries have Euro. Probably that instrument could be used for the also for the instruments. But I wouldn't agree to the idea that for the countries that are joining, that they would be like a second-class membership. That's wrong. I think we should, and all the countries should aim to be members, full members of European Union, with all the rights and obligations coming out of that.
Thank you, thank you. Dr. Rick Fawn, I'd like to come to you, Professor of International Relations at University of St. Andrews in the United Kingdom. We were just chatting before this, and I asked you what courses you teach, and you were mentioning international relations, but also post-Soviet states. And so I wanted to sort of bring that perspective into this conversation and also ask you a two-pronged question. You know, what are some lessons learned from post-Soviet states in terms of EU accession that you could apply maybe to the current moment, if that's something that you have an opinion on, or if that's something that you've looked at, But also at the same time, I want to have you sort of look at this broader question of, you know, whether you think this current debate about EU enlargement, as we mentioned, I think, you know, there are multiple countries in the EU waiting room. Countries want to join. They want to undergo the domestic reforms necessary to join because there's a benefit to being a part of the EU. So does this desire to join the European Union reflect, you know, broader changes in the international system? Are states looking for this sort of economic and security protection, especially, you know, coming from the United States? We talk about great power competition all the time, and I think that's a conversation for a different day, but I do think it applies here because the EU is very much a part of this.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's multiple questions, but before turning to those, just as everyone has done before, but I do it very heartfelt, an enormous thanks to our organizers, the MFA and the OR, for what has been a fantastic event. And many people have spoken about the beauty of Yerevan, but I would add to that, especially to Armenians who are still with us, that Geghart and Garni are among the most beautiful, interesting places I've ever been. So Yerevan and much more. So turning to these questions, starting point, I just clarify, post-communist, post-Soviet. And perhaps we don't want to use these terms anyway because they're 30 plus years out of date, but post-communist tends to refer to the satellite countries, the Poland, Czech Republic, so on. Post-Soviet, those that were in the Soviet Union. So the majority of the accession countries in 2004, 2007 would have been post-communist. The three Baltic republics, of course, were a curious situation because they weren't in the Soviet Union the entirety of the history of the Soviet Union. They were forcibly annexed, as we should all know, at the end of the Second World War. First comment, the EU, yes, is a type of club, and clubs have membership. They have membership criteria. I don't think the EU obliges anybody to be interested in the EU. But if you want to be interested in the club, there are rules. I also think maybe I'm too naive and too soft about these things. I actually think, on the whole, those rules are for a common good. Now, I've studied the accession process in Central Europe and the Baltic, Southeastern Europe. This was, and it's been confirmed by people who experienced it and were practitioners of it, this was a tough process, an awful lot involved. But I would absolutely say for the better. We've had some indicators here, and over the past 2 days, I think it's unfathomable that accession delivered. It did. These countries, these peoples, these societies are vastly better off. Second, the club works in different ways. And we've been speaking to this, but let's be very, very firm. There are different possibilities within the EU. There are different possibilities on the outside with the EU. So the Deputy Minister, for example, already turned to some of the major options within the EU, Eurozone, Schengen. So it is not one monolithic thing. And then in terms of countries that are interested, and let's say that again, these are countries that are interested. They're not being compelled. It is not simply a process of in or out. There's an accession process. There are, and this has been confirmed by members of this panel, there are very good reasons for all that has to be adapted to in that accession process. But alongside the process, let's put it in blunt terms, there are lots of rewards to be had. Right? It's not an in-out question. And as somebody, I'll give it away now, you're hearing a Canadian accent from somebody who is also British and in Britain a long time. I would love Canada to be in the EU. I would love Britain to come back into the EU. I put my biases out there. But that is to speak to countries that can have very different relations with the EU. Consider Norway, that comes top of the Human Development Index every year. Very wealthy country. Or Switzerland. Who wouldn't want to be members of countries like that? They didn't opt in fully to the EU. They put themselves in a curious situation where they actually contribute very substantially to the EU budget, but without any real input. No, these are choices that can be had. I think in terms of funding, almost limitless. Let's be blunt. The European Union is extremely good at assisting, especially those who are in the accession process. There are gains to be had, and there are societal gains to be had. One difficulty, I suspect, is that the EU is not so good or not so even in advertising itself and what it does. I can give myriads of examples where it's worked better and not worked. I suspect part of the problem in the EU, this was certainly the case in Britain, and in some of the would-be entrant countries, what the EU does, what it funds, what it supports, is simply not known. And that also allows, I'll be blunt again, that simply allows conspiracy theories to dominate discourses. And again, I don't think the EU is particularly good, I wish it were better, at pushing back at these things. So countries that are interested have much to gain over what can be a long-term process. If there is fatigue, disappointment, that may well be happening with some Western Balkan countries that have been queued for a number of years. There are myriad reasons for that. That can be with domestic changes, and I would stress also, from my perspective certainly, when a country is in the accession process, they get a great deal of assistance from the European Union in making those changes. It's not a unilateral process. It's a very, very consensual one, I think, and with the EU being extremely helpful. So in a very few words, considering the question we've been set here, I would slightly rephrase it. Right? There isn't an in-out dichotomy. There is a longer process potentially, yes. but with lots of gains alongside that, gains that can particularly support people like youth. We're all in favor of that, that can signal to societies that the gains will be very, very considerable. We take it for granted, but things like health and safety, and the EU is extremely good at that. It might be painfully bureaucratic and boring, but it does make societies safer and healthier. Enormous gains that are often intangible or, frankly, boring. And countries gain from this. So I think it's a significant win process for everyone.
Thank you, Professor. Tatiana Turcolet, compliance officer at the European Investment Bank Group based in Luxembourg. I wanted to come to you because, as Professor Fon mentioned, there are a lot of issues that I think often not necessarily get ignored, but get forgotten when we're talking about the EU, things like health and security, but also funding. I mean, the financial aspect of both EU membership and EU funding is a huge part of this conversation. And I think, with your position, you can speak to this in a way that very few people can, because it does feel like it gets pretty niche and into the weeds. So I wanted to ask you, where does, from the European Investment Bank, where does that fit into this conversation? But also, where does the EU fit into your conversation at the EIB? When we're looking at things like EU enlargement, this is, bringing economies into as the professor said, sort of this club that comes with different risks and benefits. But how do you think about sort of mitigating those risks of enlargement from a financial and investment perspective?
Thank you so much, Rachel. First and foremost, let me join my co-panelists in thanking a big thanks to our co-organizers who host us here, which is an incredible event, an incredible platform in this beautiful country for this kind of topics and discussions in the current situation that we're in. And also, of course, the ORF, who made this all possible from idea, bringing it all to reality. Second of all, this topic is particularly close to my heart, not only because of the nature of my job, but also because I was born in what is currently one of the candidate countries, in Moldova. I've been living abroad since many years, but I remember very well the times when we still needed a visa to go to just neighboring Romania, which nowadays seems very difficult to imagine, even since we were fortunate to have the visa liberalization, for example, is one of the many steps for EU accession. But I have also had the privilege and pleasure to advise my government on the EU accession process. So I've seen this from both the governance perspective, but also as a simple citizen, what it means to be, let's say, on the other side in this very long process, and see and feel the aspirations of joining the EU one day, hopefully, and little by little it became a reality when our candidate country. And just to delve into the topic of this session, which is the last basically on the topic of EU enlargement, it was very interesting to hear all the ideas, debates about the EU and what it means, both from inside and outside perspectives. So I will try not to repeat my co-panelists, but rather to wrap up on what the whole process is, including from my current position and touching upon the topic of funding. What I would like to emphasize, and this has been said again and again here in various sessions, is that EU is first and foremost about values. I know this, again, sounds very, very abstract, and we probably tend to disregard it more often than not, especially in the case of aspiring countries. The EU, of course, is about very generous funding, but also for the member states as well. It's about subsidies, it's about grants, it's about a single market, free trade, and so on. However, we should stick in whatever position we are, especially as a citizen, to the fact that this whole entity, the EU as a supranational entity, is based on mutual respect. I've heard some debates about this. I can say, being based basically in the heart of the EU, that this is what drives us every day, the mutual respect, values, and indeed, these concepts, as abstract as they are, lead us to other concepts that we, again, especially those living in the EU, took for granted, like air quality, safety, excellent medicine, going to a doctor without having to pay a bribe, which unfortunately is happening in many other countries. So I think that's important to keep in mind, especially for the aspiring countries, because this will be the building bricks of your accession towards the EU in the future. And indeed, perhaps the EU is not perfect, but it's a process. It's, let's say, under construction, and the most important is that we are all striving to make it better. We might have more regulations than probably other parts of the world, which is maybe not ideal, but at the same time, there is always a reason behind that. And as long as I think we keep in good faith, it's both those who work on this topic, but also as citizens will be all better off. It's also not easy. I mean, I've seen different parallels, and I heard about the EU. I see it more as a rather big family of 27 members. And as we all know, it's never easy with the relationships in the family, small ones, let alone a big one. Imagine it would be 27 people in one family. So, but I think that also shows how we actually made it happen. Throughout the years, the EU has been there, fortunately, since many years, and now in these times of crisis, we rather stick together than apart. Also, on the point of whether the EU should be a two-tier system, I totally agree with my co-panelists. I guess we generally need more harmonization, not less, in the EU. At the same time, we're already at different speeds in different fields, like in the Schengen, the Euro area. So we should actually try to have a rather level playing field than less. And eventually we see progress even in these fields. For example, in the case of the European Public Prosecutor's Office, where Poland recently decided to join. One tangible effect, and I think it's important to work in good faith for all the member states on this front.
Thank you so much. So we have about 15 minutes left, and so what I would like to do is maybe a quick lightning round for the panelists, like one more quick question. But I'd also really like the audience to ask a couple and get you. I already see one right here, waving your hand, and a couple. There's two. So I basically want to come back to all of you and ask you if there's anything that you want to respond to that the panelists have said. I will start to my immediate right, Mr. Khandanian, but maybe talking a little bit. I think like disparities between established members and new members, that's been mentioned. So how do you mitigate that? I really want to talk about European values And, we kind of talked about the Copenhagen criteria, this set of standards a country has to meet to be eligible for membership. So are we running into a problem where values in European Union members diverge, and what does that mean for decision making? And then finally, and you don't have to answer all of these, just kind of pick up what you would like. EU skepticism. I mean, we're dealing with a loss of faith in institutions in the United States as well, but also globally, and the EU is not immune to this. So how do you deal with EU skepticism and navigate and mitigate this loss of faith in the EU at a time when unity is so important? So I'll start to my immediate right and then just work my way down pretty quickly, if you don't mind, and then we'll just turn to the audience for a couple of quick questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I would just like to react to what Professor Faun said, and as closer we get with the EU and as closer we observe the accession process, we indeed realize that the accession is more of internal process of each country which is trying to become a member of the European Union rather than a diplomatic process. So I also agree that every country is benefiting a lot while taking these steps closer to the European Union. And when I talked in the beginning about the signals, and I only mentioned one of them, the law, the symbolic signal of the accession to the European Union, I think, and you mentioned about the values, the Copenhagen criteria. I think the recent democratic progress that Armenia has made for the last few years is also a clear signal that we belong to that family, that we are European, that we share the democratic nature of the European Union. And also in the previous panel, Foreign Minister Siarto, talking about the merit-based membership, said that the conflict, being in conflict, is not a merit. Agree with this or not, but I think our commitment to peace process in this neighborhood, because I believe European Union is interested to have a peaceful neighborhood in its borders. Our commitment to the peace process is also a signal to the European Union that we are interested to be part of the family.
Thank you. Just going back to your question on the values and whether we should have to be strict on that in planning our enlargement process. So the EU rules and EU laws are very clear about that. Is the article, if I remember correctly, 49 of the EU Treaty. It says that any European country that respects European values that are stated in Article number 2 could become member of European Union. So it's like doesn't leave any question with that. It's if you respect, then you can start the whole process. If not, if you have some issues with the general EU values, then it's not the right club, not the right place to be. So I think on that it's and it is like that, and it has to remain like that. We shouldn't compromise on our values. But then on some other things, also hearing the debate here in Armenia and in other countries, or some misperception of European Union, I remember all those talks also in Lithuania, like, okay, what will happen with our culture, with our identity? Will it survive? When we are then members of European Union, maybe we'll have to sacrifice it. And it proved to be totally wrong. We are fine. We are Lithuanians as we are, and we became even more Lithuanians after those 20 years. We were talking about like linguistical things. I think that our national language, Lithuanian language, was never ever in the history of our country so much respected as it is right now, and there are so much attention to that because all the EU laws, everything has to be translated into our language, and it is equal. Official language with all the others. The same with our ethnical culture or anything that we want to promote. We are happy to do that. EU is just giving instruments to do that. And my final thing on the future enlargements and this basic principle that it has to be based on merits. I think that that's very clear rule, and it's very right rule. It was always there from the beginning. Each individual country has to be judged according to its own merits, and we have to be very strict to that. And we have to, we have our rules, but then all the candidates, they have expectations. If we say that their progress will be judged on their own merits, that's what we have to fulfill. It cannot be like that we say if you are fulfilling the criteria, if you implement this or that reform, you will get one step closer to European Union. And then after some time we say, but we have some bilateral issues, and first you do this and do that, and then we can talk about that. And I think this principle is there, but we have to be very clear, and we have to be also reliable partners for the candidate countries, and implement that. Thanks.
Professor.
First, on what I call public relations. The EU can and should do more. Brief word on Brexit. Whitehall, the government area in London, never did I see a European Council flag. Very, very disappointing. Contrast that to downtown Kiev, 2013, 2014. 800,000 people eventually out on the streets and flying the European Council flag. Britain used to fly the European Council flag on embassies outside the country. So that's just a starting point on understanding, let alone appreciating what was offered. And I think we had a tremendous gap in that in Britain. It can often have something to do with domestic politics, but also the EU having certain limitations in projecting itself. And I would, again, like to see much more of that, including on things that make, and there are many cases of it, day-to-day improvements for people. Next, the EU is, and this is in some ways a seeming drawback, it's very consociational. Everybody is in it. There was a debate that was defeated about less representation for the newcomers 2004, 2007 and onwards. No, we have a commissioner for every country. We have the European Parliament. Everybody's in the system. So that makes for arguably a clunky system, but everybody is in it. And I'll be quite extreme now and say, contrast that, the seeming bureaucracy, the seeming slowness, the seeming, I disagree, seeming unrepresentativeness, contrast that to 3 generations of massive bloodshed in Europe. Let's take a bit of that consociational system to what we had before. The EU, I genuinely believe, is an antidote to war. And it's hard to put a price on that. It really is priceless. Countries can do it at their own pace. Nobody is obliging. I think that's extremely important, and I'd reiterate the gains that could be made along the way. I'm delighted, may I say, Deputy Minister, about the reaffirmation that national identities haven't been challenged. In many ways, I think the opposite. So much opportunity to support, especially smaller language groups in that, as another hand up, as a beneficiary in a very competitive process for large European Commission research grants. We had to be very, very European. We had to ensure mobility. We had to be literally from across Portugal up to Estonia. We were building European identity. People who integrated with each other, spoke multiple languages and so on. This is priceless, right? An awful lot to be gained. If countries don't want to engage, they don't need to, but much to be had. Thank you.
Thank you. I really love what you just said. The EU is an antidote to war. That'll stay with me for a long time. Tatiana, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be very concise so that we leave a bit of room for questions from the audience. This is just to say that despite all the internal challenges that we can see within the EU itself, it still remains one of the most attractive places to live. And we can see that as a proof with the very high immigration rates that we have. But just to give a bit of hope to the aspiring countries and towards the path to the EU is that we have a lot of changes and the dynamics in the current international relations is changing very rapidly. At the same time, internally, we also have our own challenges in terms of shrinking demographics, labor shortages, and so on. So I participated in another forum focusing on Ukraine, where basically with all the brave people fighting for their lives in the country. Now they were actually presenting how they could contribute to the EU in terms of cybersecurity, defense, and this kind of fields. And what can I say? It's chapeau, and I think that's also a good example for other candidate countries to think in terms of, since I was speaking about mutual respect, also what we mutually can do for the EU.
Thank you. Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. There's a question here and a question there. I will take those two. That's it. Sir, you go right ahead. I'll take them at the same time. Please just be brief. Let's not do any speeches or anything like that, and make sure it ends in a question. There might be a microphone, but if not, just yell it and I can repeat it up here.
Wojciech Wojtasiewicz, Polish Institute of International Affairs. I have a question to Mr. Hanadian. I would like to ask you about the political crisis in neighboring Georgia. Aren't you afraid that the crisis in the relations between Georgia and the European Union, because of that anti-European and pro-Russian Georgian government, could negative influence of your chances to integrate with the European Union? Thank you.
Thank you. And then ma'am, right over there thanks.
Thank you, Stephanie Fenkert, International Institute for Peace, Austria, Vienna. I do work a lot on EU enlargement as well. I have two, first, a very brief comment. Thank you so much, Tatiana, and also Mr. Pranevicius, for stressing that the European Union is a value-based organization. I think people tend to forget this. And this is partly also due to developments within the European Union, but it is actually written in Article 2. So, and I think this is very important that we tend not to forget it. Two brief questions. One is, how can we make the enlargement process credible again? Because it is not credible at all. It is not merit-based. It wasn't for a very, very long time. And this is maybe due to the fact that the European Union has not been deepening the integration as it should have been. We see national tendencies, and we see a lot of member states actually applying national interests before the common European good or whatever. I mean, Albania is a very good example. Macedonia, which was blocked from opening accession talks for 20 years nearly. So I think, so how can we make the process credible again? And then if we look, and this is maybe also again to Prevenitius, how can we make the European Union also be able to act again? Which reforms do we need? I'm speaking about the Council of Europe, because we do know 27 member states, 27 different opinions, and we do know that it is very difficult to come to terms in this. And I doubt that if we are not tackling reforming in specific areas, the Council, that we will not see any more members in the European Union. Sorry for being a little bit critical. I'm very pro-European, and I'm very much, but I think we need to ask the tough questions if we want to proceed with, I don't know, the European Union in the future. Thank you.
Those are excellent questions. Thank you so much. I'll start with you, and then to the Deputy Minister, and then if anyone else wants to do a quick.
Thank you very much for the question. Look, beyond everything, our number one foreign policy priority is to have stable South Caucasus and normal relations with our neighbors. Unfortunately, in this region, we don't have a luxury of having it more and more. So with those who we have really great relations, we should maintain these relations. And with Georgia, we have a strategic partnership, and we value that partnership very much. And we are building on that. Of course, it would be much easier for us, even geographically, even in terms of access to the Black Sea and closeness to the European Union, to do these steps together. And I can say that Armenia was one of the biggest advocates for Georgia to receive candidate status for the membership of the European Union. We follow what is going on between the European Union and Georgia, and we can hope that these relations will return to the normal path, and we are ready to do as much as possible for our neighbors to benefit from those relations, and also to help us to take further steps towards the European Union. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thanks, and thank you for great questions. Well, I'll try to be optimistic, although I understand where you're coming from and why you are asking those things, because I really have a huge sympathy to those issues. The question of the reform of European Union and enlargement, it was always there. I really remember those talks when we were entering European Union, and at that time we also had before that Amsterdam, the Nice Treaty, and then the European Convention, and all those discussions about how we have to reform EU, because without reform we will not survive. Some reforms are there. In Lisbon Treaty, the basic institutional setup was a little bit adjusted for the enlargement, and it is functioning. It is functioning. I don't see that, like, if we start to put it as a precondition that in order to continue enlargement, we need certainly to do some major changes. I'm afraid that in that case we will just delay the enlargement, and we will have a good excuse not to do the enlargement. What I thought would be a good thing is to change our mindset. This enlargement fatigue, it exists. But I think it's high time for us to kind of reapproach the whole process from that angle, that enlargement is a possibility. Enlargement is not just that some countries want to accede to European Union and it will be beneficial to them. We in European Union, we have to, although we understand that all those facts that enlargement is also is beneficial not just to the acceding countries but to the European Union as such. But I think probably it's also a question about communication, that we have to talk about that, and we have to talk more about the opportunities that enlargement is bringing to everyone. We were talking about Ukraine, and then I just don't want to take Ukraine and then leave Moldova or Western Balkans or other countries aside, but it's having Ukraine now in the European Union would be a huge advantage in many respects, be it security, be it economy, be it all the other elements that Ukraine could bring to European Union. And if we take it as something like, okay, we have to spend money, we have to do this and that, it will cost us that much, then you will have all the good excuses to delay the enlargement. But if we manage to fill the sphere with those arguments that enlargement is beneficial to European Union, I think that would be extremely helpful, and then probably the mood will change. Then those small adjustments that are needed to make the process, like internal decision making in European Union, as we were talking about those blocking chapters and not allowing different candidates to move further because of some strange reasons, and why this merit-based principle is not working. Maybe if we switch from unanimity to qualified majority voting in those special occasions, that would be helpful. And if the overall atmosphere is much more positive, then I think those decisions will be made much easier.
Thank you. We are out of time. Okay, unless there's any burning comments okay. Thank you so much for your attention, for your questions. Please join me in thanking our fantastic panelists. This was really fascinating.